I have always been very close to my grandparents. I spent a good part of my childhood in their house, an old, large house with long hallways full of old paintings on the walls. For me, the house always had a somewhat melancholic air, but it was comfortable in a way. My memories there are full of sunny afternoons, the smell of cakes fresh from the oven, and the sound of the radio playing old songs in the living room. But there was something about that house that, for a long time, I couldn't understand. Something that I felt but couldn't explain. I started to notice it when I was about 8 years old. The first time I saw something was on a summer afternoon. I was playing in the hallway that connected the living room to my grandparents' bedroom. It was a place that always intrigued me, because, although it was well lit during the day, at night it was strangely dark, even with the lights on. I remember that afternoon, as I was running down the hallway, I saw a figure passing quickly from one side to the other, as if someone was going from one room to the other. I stopped immediately and looked around, but I didn't see anyone. I went into the living room and found my grandmother sitting in the rocking chair, knitting as she always did. I asked if anyone else was home, but she said no. My grandfather was in the backyard, tending to the garden. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it. After all, it could have been my imagination. In the years that followed, I continued to visit my grandparents' house frequently. And every now and then, I would see that figure again. Sometimes it was a shadow passing in the hallway. Other times I would catch a glimpse of it in the bathroom mirror while I was brushing my teeth. It was always quick, like a flash, and it always left me with that uncomfortable feeling, as if something was watching me. As I grew older, I began to ask about the history of the house. I discovered that it was a very old building, dating back to the mid-19th century. Before it belonged to my grandparents, the house had belonged to a traditional family from the city, but not much was known about what happened to them. There were rumors that one of the children of the couple who lived there had died young, but no one knew for sure. These stories intrigued me even more. The more I researched, the more I felt connected to something in that house that I couldn't explain. And at the same time, I began to notice that I wasn't the only one who had seen the figure. Once, while talking to my cousin about the house, she mentioned seeing something similar. She described the figure exactly as I had seen it: fast, dark, and always lurking, never quite visible. It wasn't until I turned 16 that things took a more frightening turn. It was a normal weekend, and I was spending the night at my grandparents' house. It was after 10 at night, and I was watching TV in the living room. The house was quiet, my grandparents had already gone to bed. I was almost dozing off on the couch when I heard a sound coming from the hallway. It was like a whisper, very low, but clearly human. I got up, trying to listen better, but the sound stopped. I walked to the hallway and, as soon as I got there, I saw the figure again. But this time it was different. It didn't just walk down the hallway, it stopped. I stood there, unable to move, while that dark figure seemed to stare at me. It had no face, no defined shape, it was just a shadow, but I knew it was looking at me. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Then, in a quick movement, the figure disappeared into the wall. I hurried back to the living room, my heart racing, in disbelief at what had just happened. The next morning, I decided to tell my grandparents what I had seen. To my surprise, they didn't seem surprised. My grandfather, normally skeptical, just sighed and said that the house had always had its quirks. My grandmother, on the other hand, went further. She said that when they were newlyweds, she had also seen strange things in the house. Not only figures, but she had also heard voices and felt as if someone was always nearby, especially on colder nights. She never liked to talk about it, believing that if she ignored it, maybe it would stop. But it never did. Over time, these apparitions became more frequent. I began to see them almost every time I visited the house. Sometimes it was a figure in the hallway, other times it was strange shadows in the mirror, and once, I clearly saw a figure standing in the doorway of my grandparents' bedroom as I walked down the hallway in the early hours of the morning. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but it was hard to ignore something that repeated itself so often. Things got even more intense when my grandmother got sick. She was diagnosed with a degenerative disease, and she was soon bedridden. My mother and I spent a lot of time at their house to help care for her. And as I did, I began to notice that the figure became more present as her health declined. It was as if the presence of death was drawing it closer. There was one night in particular that I will never forget. I was in my grandmother's room, caring for her, while my mother rested in the other room. The room was heavy, her breathing was shallow, and the air seemed colder than usual. Suddenly, I felt a very strong presence in the room. I didn't want to look, but something inside me forced me to turn my head toward the corner of the room. And there it was, more defined than ever. It seemed larger, denser, and it was standing there, as if it were waiting. I couldn't move or scream. The figure remained there for what seemed like an eternity of seconds before slowly dissipating like smoke. The next morning, my grandmother passed away. After that, the apparitions diminished, but they didn't stop completely. The house still had that strange air, and I still saw the figure from time to time, but it seemed less present, as if my grandmother's death had taken some of that dark energy with it. Years later, my grandparents passed away, and the house sat abandoned for a while before being sold. I haven't been back there since, but the memories of that house, and what I saw there, have never left me. To this day, I don't know what the figure was, but I know it was real. And I know that it was somehow connected to the house and the people who lived there. I don't believe it was a spirit in the traditional sense, but rather a manifestation of something we don't fully understand. Something that was connected to the history of that house, and that manifested itself in subtle but disturbing ways. This experience left me with an insatiable curiosity about what else there might be in the world beyond what we can see and touch. And as frightening as it was, it also taught me that there is so much more to life and death. This was another chilling tale that makes us question what really goes on beyond our comprehension. What would you do if you had an experience like this? Do old houses hold more than just memories? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more supernatural stories like this. Until next time, and remember, not everything we see can be explained.